Alright, so step one of the rear axle and coil conversion is done. So as you can see, we've got our fish plate nicely tacked on to the chassis, and yeah, pretty much both sides fish plated there and there at the front. So that's done. I'm just going to run you guys through the fish plate quickly, and I'm just going to explain like why it's going to this point and so on and so on. So pretty much the center of the diff for the rear is going to be here where this factory hole is in the chassis. So pretty much this was the original center line for the diff, so we're going to be pretty much doing the same as the original center line. So yeah, that's center diff. And just for the fish plate, so pretty much we're going to have our coil hat here, we're going to have our tube mount here for the shocks, and then on the other side here somewhere we're going to have our panhard mount, and then at the back here we're going to have two bits of tube spaced roughly 500 apart for the fuel tank. So pretty much the original fuel tank would hide under here, and it was sort of like a long rectangle fuel tank, which was pretty much, it was going to be in the way. So we're getting a more of a square shaped fuel tank from a patrol, and we're going to be chucking it in the rear. So that's pretty much this section done. So yeah, coil towers, shock tower, panhard, and then just the two fuel cell mounts, fuel tank. And then for the front end, after the factory chassis brace, on this side we're just going to have the upper control arm mounts. So they're the short control mounts. They're roughly 400mm long. So from the center here, from our center mark to here roughly is our where our upper control arms are going to go. So I've just made the fish plate a little bit longer, and that's pretty much it. So turned out alright, happy with it. So yeah, fish plating's done, and then also we're going to have the lower control arms, which are going to go somewhere here further up on the chassis. Have no idea yet where they're going to land, so I'm not sure. I think I'm going to go with those first in terms of positioning the diff and getting it mounted. I reckon I'm going to do the lower control arms first, and then continue on with everything else. I'll probably do the lower control arms first, and then I'm going to do the upper control arms just to get the diff like centered, and you know, tack all that in so the diff won't move and everything. So we'll have all our upper lower control arm set, then the panhard, and then we can do the coil hats, coil towers, and shock will be last. So yeah, that's the plan anyway. So fish plate's done. Now we're going to move on to getting the actual diff aligned with our lines, and go from there. So yeah. Alrighty guys, so continuing on with the rear end coil progress, I guess you could say. So last time I had just finished the chassis fish plate, and as you can see I've made a bit of progress, and I've got the lower long arms in, and now I'm just working on the upper control arms. So again, I'll just run you guys through what's going on. It's a bit messy, but pretty much we've got our center lines for the axle, basically the same process as the front, but this is going in like literally 10 times quicker than the front, because, you know, once you do something once, the second time it's going to be easier, and also we're not mucking around with the mounts on the front diff. Everything's just bolt in, so it's basically just more aligning everything and then making mounts to suit, which is so much quicker. But anyway, so for alignment, the same process as the front in the previous videos. Just done our center line, and I've got marks on the floor this way, and then I've also got marks this way. But what I've been doing to center the axle this way, I've just been measuring off the chassis and then back to this, to the diff, to the edge here. So just making sure that the diffs are centered both ways. But that's pretty much it for alignment. And then what I've gone ahead and done is made up these mounts for the long arms either side. So they're the mounts there. I've sort of made like a little capping slash rock slider plate. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just got a piece going in the middle as well, just a flat bar piece to go hard up underneath the chassis, so should be pretty good. Just weld the whole thing around underneath. And then I've also gone ahead and done the little factory outer lip bends that are on the diff, just to get the arm in a bit easier. Just gonna go under here. Basically exactly the same thing on the other side. So those are the lower arm drop boxes, and pretty much for the upper control arms I've just welded a tube in here, tacked it in, I should say. And then I've also made up these upper control arm mounts, so pretty much that's just going to go in there like that. So yeah, I've just got this little tube in here so I can weld this on without the plates bending. I've tightened the bolt up, so I've just got a tube to the same outer width as the bush. So yeah, that's one control arm in. So I'm gonna just go ahead and weld the outside and the inside, and then I'm thinking I might even make like a capping plate that goes from the top down into here somewhere, and then weld this top bit and out a bit, and then just do the same on the other side pretty much. So yeah, very easy setting up the rear. Literally just got to make sure that your diff is centered both ways and aligned. Obviously set your diff at the same height so it's not sitting on an angle. And another thing I made sure is that this back end of the chassis is perfectly level to where I want my ride height. But yeah, it's very easy. Once you've centered your diff and your chassis is right and everything's spot on, also don't forget your pinion angle to match your back of the gearbox angle. Obviously I've got upper control arms so I can correct something if I need it, adjustable upper control arms. But yeah, pretty simple. Just roughly put the tube in where I could roughly, make a mount to suit, set one arm up straight, and then basically you're just mirroring that one. Alrighty guys, so I've just finished making up the rear panhard mount for the chassis. So I'm just going to show you guys how it turned out. Pretty good. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and paint this with a bit of primer before I stick it onto the chassis. Then I'm going to tack it on, and then I will show you guys how it looks like on the car. So yeah. Alright, so the rear panhard mount is in. So yeah, basically it's sort of just like a big, it's quite a beefy mount, I guess you could say, but I figured why not make it as strong as possible. So pretty much it's like, you can see here, it's like two wire pieces either side, that's slotted underneath the chassis. So either side, and then I just bent a bit of steel plate to butt up sort of onto the chassis and then offset down to brace the mount. So I've done that on the outer side, and then I've also done that on the inner side as well. Same thing. So yeah, pretty much can weld all this in here underneath and then on the other side, so should be nice and strong. And also, like, the reason behind this big gusset, I guess you could say, off the chassis, same thing on the front. Couldn't do it on the outside, but I've done it on the inside, like it is here on the front panhard mount. So if you pretty much think about the panhard, when it moves up and down, the diff is pulling the arm one left to right, one way or the other. So you think about all that force going on this mount, these thick gussets here on either side, you know, they're preventing the whole I guess mount from bending left or right, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's pretty much the reasoning behind it anyway, but it turned out pretty good. So that's the panhard mount in, and almost all the arms are done. I've just got to sort the sway bar out, and then I can also fully weld in these upper arms in, and do a little gusset in between those to strengthen that up. And that's it for the diff itself. All arms in, and then we just need to make the shock tower and the coils and fit the fuel tank in the back. So yeah, it's going in nice and quickly, so good stuff. Alrighty guys, so have just finished finishing off aligning the diff and fully welding in the upper control arm mounts. So basically just bent a plate and braced it on the back side, and the front side here basically the same on both sides, all welded onto the tube. And I've also welded in the tube onto the fish plate on both sides, and I've played around with the upper control arms here, and I've perfectly aligned the diff, drivers and passenger side to my line laser on the marks on the floor, and on the chassis there. So diff is aligned this way spot on, and then left to right as well. So we got nice even amount of poke from each end of the chassis from here to here. So we are perfectly aligned all around. So yeah, just welded those in and braced them up just because I wouldn't be able to get to them later, really, and I didn't want to snap the actual mounts while adjusting the diff. They probably would have been fine, but I've just gone ahead and done that anyway. But yeah, also panhard, which I think I've shown you guys. So this is the panhard angle as well. So yeah, it's looking pretty juicy. So I've got a ratchet strap here as well, which I'm going to chuck in this fuel tank now. And yeah, keep on moving on. Alrighty guys, so I just finished pretty much mucking around with the fuel tank and getting it mounted. So pretty much 90% done with the fuel tank. So just going to show you guys how it turned out. It looks pretty cool. So yeah. So this is it. I've bent up 2 bits of 50mm tube and welded a 5mm plate off the side to mount the fuel tank. So pretty much fuel tank pushes underneath the plate here and 3 bolts either side. So I've just clamped this end up. I haven't welded it or tacked it in yet. I've just sort of mocked it up. So bit of a top view. Yeah, it's looking really sick. So super stoked with it. So yeah, that's the fuel tank mounted in. I'll just show you guys the underneath as well. It's a bit of a back brace for the tube at the back here. So pretty much when we were stripping all the factory IFS stuff, there was originally a brace sort of that went from there to there, which was like the spare tire holder, which sort of braced the rear of the chassis. So this this tube here that's holding the back end of the tank is pretty much acting like the brace for the very back end of the chassis. And yeah, fully welded, or welded either side. Turned out alright. And then that's pretty much it. So I just tried to, when setting this up, I basically, because there was not a lot of room with the mounting holes, so I just made sure that I could butt the tank up hard onto the welds so I have as much meat on the top plate as possible. But that's pretty much it. And then same thing for the front here as well. So it's looking really good. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and tack this in, and then pull the fuel tank out, and then fully weld them in, get the fuel tank back in on just a couple of bolts for now, and that'll be the fuel tank in. So next step, which I'm thinking of probably doing, is getting the coil mounts in, coil towers. So alrighty guys, so just finished off with the fuel tank and mounting that up. So that piece that we had mocked up and bent up before is fully welded in, and I've also drilled all the holes to mount the fuel tank in. So that's the fuel tank mounted in and finished. Now we are going to be working on the coil tower. So pretty much all I've done is I've just got a level and plumbed up from the center of my coil hat to the chassis, which is this line here. So this is the center of my coil tower. Now this is going to be quite a tight fit. So these are the Hyperflex coils here, 3-inch. So basically what I've measured out is, so widthways for the coil hat. So the coil itself is like 175mm wide. So what I've pretty much done is I've allowed roughly just under 10mm either side clearance for the internal part of the coil hat. So it's like 190 should give us roughly just under 10mm either side, which will be quite perfect, especially if we're going to be welding inside the coil hat. So should just be enough room for the coil to sit in. Now the reason for this is, so I said 190mm internal measurements, 4mm plate, so you're roughly at 200mm external for the coil hat. So now if I measure from my center mark 100mm halfway, center mark there, you can see we're pretty much almost right on, probably a 5mm gap between that factory support there. So it's pretty much, we're going to have to make it quite spot on because it is very tight. Now one thing I could do is move or relocate the coil hat, but that means just more time mucking around with the diff itself and cutting and grinding, and if I can avoid mucking around with the diff, then I will, simply because it's going to just take more time and we're trying to get this thing done. So yeah, 190 internal measurement, so that's the internal one. And then for our long ways, as in coming out of the chassis, pretty much this coil, if you plumb up from the edge of the coil hat, it's pretty much flush with the chassis. So the coils are going to probably be slightly inverted, so pushed outwards, which isn't an issue. That should be fine. So pretty much just giving us 200 external long ways. So that'll give us, you know, probably more than 10mm either side, I'd say. Or 200 internal, I should say. I think I said. So yeah, those are our measurements. Now, I never recorded how I made the front coil towers, so I'll just run you guys through how I'm going to make them. I will record this bit, but so these are the front coil towers here. Now, they are fully welded internally and externally, so I made them quite beefy. But pretty much how I made them, I don't have a bending machine, so pretty much this is one piece here, and this is the top piece is another piece here. So there are two measurements that I was talking about just before. So they're just welded together like an L, and then this whole piece, this brace piece, is one piece as well, which I just sort of tacked on and bent, heated up and bent to suit. So I'll show you guys that anyway, but that's pretty much how we're going to be making the rears as well. So yeah, first step is I'm going to go ahead and cut the two pieces to suit, weld them together for our L, and then we're going to continue on from there. Alrighty guys, so I've just cut out the two shapes that I was talking about previously, and I've cleaned it all up, and I've got it on the magnet plate here. Butted up the corners together so we can get a nice weld on the outside. So that's pretty much the starting shape, just this L piece of the coil hat. So I'm going to go ahead, tack this up, weld it through, and then we can start mucking around with some templates for the outer brace bit for the coil tower. So yeah. Alrighty guys, so just finished up welding the two bits together. That's the inner side here, this is the outer side here. So I've welded that up, and now I've also just made a quick template for the outer brace bit. So I'm just going to quickly explain how I've done the measurements. So pretty much on a larger piece of cardboard, just mark center of your cardboard. Also make sure you cut the top piece of cardboard flush so you got a nice square edge. But pretty much I went from center of the coil tower to the side here roughly, which is where the corner is where I want my lip to start dipping down to the corner from somewhere around here. So it's pretty much 100 mil. So I've gone 100 mil from my center either side, and then I've decided to make a 40 mil lip from the top of the coil tower. So pretty much you start off with this box here, and then we've got our cross marks here, so that's our 40 mil and that's our 100 mil cross piece here either side. And then basically from your top corner you just measure down for what your overall length is for your coil heart. So we had 100 mil, so I just measured 100 mil from the top, put a mark in the corner, and then join the two marks together, and that's our template. So I'm just going to try and set up the camera here so I can show you guys what it looks like. But that's what it's going to look like from the side. So that's pretty much it. So that's our template that we've done, and that's our brace bit. So obviously I'm going to make these a bit longer because they're a bit short, but one thing I noticed when making the front coil towers, it's best to actually add a fair bit more than you need. So don't measure this length to the corners precisely. Make them 30 mil longer or 40 mil even, just to be safe, just to save you some time on cutting out another piece if you muck it up. So pretty much I'm going to cut this piece out of our 4 mil plate. I'm going to make it look nice, file it up, whatever, and pretty much we'll record this, but we're just going to start with the middle here, tack it, weld the piece, and then slowly with a hammer bend our piece all the way around until we get a nice shape. And then once you've got this excess hanging down the bottom, you can just cut that off with a grinder, whack it in and weld it, and that's your coil tower done. So we're going to keep going. Alrighty guys, so this is the original template. Now I've gone ahead and cleaned this out, cut it out and cleaned it up nicely, and then I've also made a little starting bend here. So pretty much all I've done is I've just marked the center of our plate here, and then center of our coil tower, so we'll be able to align both centers. But pretty much when this was a flat piece of bar, all I did was I found just like a bit of, you can cut a template out of like a bit of wood, timber or whatever, but basically I just gone ahead, put it in the vise, and then just bent this up by hand by pulling down either side. Didn't need to heat it up, so that's how I've done that. And then so pretty much All we're going to do now is align our two centers like so, and I'm going to leave a nice lip here so we can fill it with weld, but we're going to maybe do like a 50mm weld at the front, because you can see here it's touching nicely, and once that front's welded, that'll be solid, and we'll be pretty much able to just slowly heat up the edges and massage it with a hammer to mold it nicely to the corners, and then weld as we go, and then keep bending, weld as we go. So that's it. Alright, so coil tower number one is finished. So this is pretty much how it turned out. Welds turned out mint. Super happy. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I've also given it a couple of little beads on the inside here as well for extra strength, but overall turned out really good. Happy with it. And then I'm just going to chuck the spring in here to show you guys how the spring sits. So you can pretty much see there's just enough gap around there as well for the spring to sit in nicely. So yeah, turned out mint. Just gonna now mount this onto the car. So pretty much with the coil towers, unlike the front end where we had to muck around with adjusting the coil height to make it work with the springs and so on and so on, I'm just going to set the coil towers flush at the top of the chassis and call it a day. And whether the car sits too high or too low, we'll just change it with either spacers or springs, whatever. So yeah, flush with the top of the chassis. So I'm just going to have to muck around with getting it aligned, but I'm going to go ahead and get that in, and then go on to the other side and do the other side. So that's pretty much it. So yeah. Alright guys, so the first coil tower is in. Just tacked it in place with flush pretty much top of the chassis. So yeah, it's looking pretty good. I'll just show you guys underneath quickly. So I just done pretty much the same as what we done in the front. I just did 2 holes either side and then slit with the grinder to be able to weld a bead on the inside here, just so it's got a bit more stuff to hold on to. And yeah, just made sure to drill around the chassis hole here, and that's pretty much it. So that's coil tower number 1 done. Just got to do the same thing on the other side. And the only thing I'm not too sure is, do we do a coil tower brace from one coil tower to the other? I think compared to like a original from factory Patrol coil tower, rear coil tower mounts, this is, I'd say, quite heavy duty. I think it'll be pretty solid, but the only issue is I think Patrols, I know of a known issue of Patrols, I'd say, is the rear coil tower mounts cracking. But I don't know, I reckon once this is welded in, it's going to be pretty solid. The only thing I was thinking is getting some 38mm tube and running one bit of tube bent up, sort of like that, to the other side. Have two of them, and then have a bit of like 40mm, 4mm plate in between and weld it. Yeah, sort of thinking that. I don't know if it's necessary, but probably wouldn't hurt. Wouldn't add that much more weight really. But yeah, so another thing I also did is before I put the coil tower in, I just welded that end of the fish plate and welded around the hole. So that's all welded. And yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and make this other coil tower, and then we're going to decide whether to brace it or not. So yeah. Alrighty guys, so check this out. Coil towers are in, both are in. Just finished off making up this coil tower brace, just bent up 2 bits of tube and then have a gusset in between. So it's looking pretty good. So yeah, coil tower is done and the brace is done. I've tacked that all in, ready to go. Now I just got my shocks that have arrived, so I'm pretty much at the stage of trying to figure out how to mount these 13-inch travel shocks. So pretty much what I've done so far is done a bit of mass here. So the overall shock length is, I think, like 870 open or something, 890, and the closed shock length is 495. So pretty much what I've done so far is I've set my diff to at ride height. So we're running a 35-inch tire, so it's 440mm from the floor to the center of the wheel, and then another 440 to the top of the wheel. So pretty much what I've done is I've just measured from the top of the tray here to the middle of the wheel, which is 570mm roughly. Pretty sure it is. I'll just double check. I did do this with a laser, but you can see here 570mm. So what I did was I did 570mm minus 440, half of the wheel, gives me 130mm of up travel from the top of the tire to the tray. Now, the closed shock length is, I've written it down here, 495 plus 130 gives me 625. So my closed shock length plus my up travel to the tray gives me 625 open length, plus 10mm for clearance gives me 635. So what that means is that pretty much I've set this shock up from eyelet to eyelet 635mm. So basically what that means is when my diff when the diff flexes up and the tire hits the tray, I should have an extra 10mm roughly of open shock length to allow for any extra compression. But another thing is I'm probably going to set the bump stop up so the tire doesn't hit the tray before. So I'll probably add another 10 or 15mm. So that means that I'll have an overall 25 to 20mm of open shock length extra when it's on full up travel on the bump stop. So if that makes sense. So if I measure the shock now, you can see here it is, but you can see top of the shock, middle of the eyelet to middle is 635. So that's my shock opening height. Now I've just got a strap around this shock to set it to the 635 mark, and pretty much I've just played around with positioning the shock on where it's best going to be to mount it. So just got a strap at the top here, and I've sort of inverted the shock a decent amount from level. So pretty much what we're trying to clear is the panhard mount there, but also the coil spring. So you can see, like, that's the coil tower flush where the spring's going to go. So we're clearancing that as well. So this is probably the best between the two, sort of where I've set the shock up at the moment. Alright guys, so last time when we were tackling the rear part of the suspension setup and shock setup, I was talking through how I was going to set my shock height, open height and close height. So pretty much we've just jumped ahead a bit. So I've finished off the whole rear end, including the shock tower, as you can see. So yeah, pretty much just bent up a hoop from one end to the other, and then have just two bits of bracing going back from the shock hoop back to the coil tower brace. So overall turned out really sick. Super happy with it all. So yeah, and pretty much just made up these mounts and just gave them a bit of bracing, as you can see. So I'll show you a view from the rear. So one thing which you will notice is that this shock is slightly in a different position than the driver's side shock, and that's because of the actual mounting on the diffs are different. So the driver's side mount on the diff is quite more closer to the center compared to the passenger side. So the overall shock lengths are the same, it's just that the angle is a touch different because of the factory positionings on the diff are different, which I didn't know. I was sort of looking at it for a while and I couldn't figure out why they were sitting so different, but turns out the mounts on the diff are different. So yeah, shock tower in, and then I've also gone ahead and made the rear panhard mounts. So that's pretty much all it is, gusseted. And then, not panhard, sorry, sway bar. And yeah, sway bars in. So pretty much the whole rear end. Try and get a better shot. Is in. So yeah, super happy with how the shock tower turned out. So now another thing I'm going through setting up, which is basically the same principle as I've just explained with the rear. So finishing off the front shocks. So pretty much front diff is at full bump, and I've just got my shock set up about 10 mil open from full compression, 10-15 mil, and we're just setting up the shock tower. So I've pretty much just welded a tab onto the radius arm mounts, and then I've actually made up this sort of shock tower that goes into the engine bay, as you can see, and it's literally like just got enough clearance here where the brake booster is to actually pull the brake booster off. So turned out perfect. So yeah, I'm just going to continue on with setting up this driver's side shock tower. I might film a bit more on that, but yeah, pretty much got to do the other one, and then we'll be doing a cheeky little hoop brace over the engine as well for the front. But yeah, it's all slowly getting there, almost finished with all the suspension, so super keen.